Can you hear me now?
I can. How you going?
Good. How are you?
Yeah, good, mate. Yourself? It's been a while.
It's been quite a while. Yeah, yeah. It's been many months, almost a
Yeah.
year, I reckon.
Bloody hell. Yeah. Well, I mean, you weren't even president of the Sporties
No,
yet.
that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. That was last year, April, I think it was. So that's how long
Yeah.
it's been.
Well, very cool, mate. Thanks for doing this. I've been wanting to chat to you for a while, and then I keep forgetting to communicate with you. We met back in it would be 2015, 2016 or something,
Yep.
through the Superbike school, and I was thinking about it, and I realized I never really understood what you did outside of the school until it was like we got involved, through
Yep.
COVID time. They brought on some additional coaches and all that sort of thing. And then I got to know about Ride Dynamics. Got the shirt on too, mate, by the way.
Nicely. Yeah. Good. Good.
Um, and it was, I got involved much more closely with you, where we were doing some work, getting those other coaches prepared, and we stayed at your place. And then, the whole Ride Dynamics thing, became more apparent to me. And I thought I'd love to get the backstory and understand what led you to get into that. What Ride Dynamics is all about, and talk about suspension and stuff, whatever in general.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Sounds good. Yeah. So basically, go back nearly 10 years ago now, I started Q Ride Instructions,
Yeah.
and working for various mobs and so forth as an instructor. And that led me down the path more of coaching and rider development. So leading up towards Ride Dynamics starting, I was already doing my own suspension on my race bikes and suspension on other people's. And I, as it came, I was between jobs. And so I had this harebrained idea that I'd combine the two things I enjoy doing, which is rider development or coaching and suspension work. And that was it started initially as Rider Skills was a business name,
Yeah.
and that was to effectively coach people how to ride a bike, but also to get them to understand what they're doing on the motorcycle and how it impacts the motorcycle.
Yeah.
And then it kind of morphed into Ride Dynamics a couple of years later, and over the years it's morphed into a bit more suspension focused rather than coaching. I've kind of separated the two over the years.
Yeah.
But yeah, this year particularly, I've gone back towards that melding of the two, coaching and rider motorcycle suspension development with people, getting them to understand their inputs and how it affects the motorcycle, rather than just look at as motorcycles handling on the racetrack.
Yeah. Right.
The bigger input to a motorcycle is the rider on top. What they do to the motorcycle really impacts what the motorcycle can do, basically.
That's
And
interesting. That's something I've been talking to people about. I go, you can spend, a heap of money on performance products and stuff on a bike, but there's another component there. There's the human factor, and often the human factor can't get the best out of what they've even got.
Correct. That's right. Yeah. So all the stuff we throw at motorcycles, be it cartridge kits, rear shocks, blippers, all these things we put on motorcycles, all it's doing is making it easier for us to pilot it. Doesn't make it any faster. It's just easier,
Yeah.
and the reason why you go quicker is because you've got less to worry about. That's the main reason. As a rider goes, and I'm not talking about top of ASBK. I'm talking about your average track day punter, your club racer. The reason why all the club racers now are starting to approach what ASBK race winning lap times were 5, 6 years ago is because our bikes are so good now that allows us to concentrate on just riding the bike better.
Yeah.
And it allows us to free up our attention span to be smoother instead of questioning if we have tire grip, how much throttle we can give. We can put just the throttle on, the bike will do it for us almost. So it frees up our attention span to speed and direction, which is lap times. So um, the bike's technology, the stuff we buy, we fit to it, just makes it easier for us to maximize our own potential. But ultimately, we have this ceiling point somewhere of our potential,
Yeah.
and that's when coaching comes into it and maximizing your ability then, rather than looking at the bike all the time.
But that's not to discount that improvements can also be made in the handling of the bike through the technical aspects of the
For sure.
motorcycle itself.
Yes, for sure. But the bigger thing at play here is what we're doing to the bike. If we're hitting the throttle really choppy on the exit of the corner. The bike's got to deal with that load shock to the rear of the motorcycle all of a sudden. So the tyre's now overwhelmed with the fact that all that mass and all the horsepower is just dumped on the tyre.
Right.
Now, if we pick up that throttle smoother, the bike's load transfer to that tyre is a lot more gradual. And so then the bike can find its grip and help you drive off the turn better. So
Right.
that rider skill is important more so than if we're 2 clicks of compression more or half turn of preload on the rear shock. You know,
Yeah.
once you get that base working well, the rider skill working well, the ability to tune the motorcycle becomes a lot easier. And also, I suppose the window gets bigger for what we're doing at the same time.
All right. Do you think, like, the modern bikes and the things we attach to them, like tires and all that, have come a long, long way in the last 10, 15, 20 years. Certainly in my 50 years of riding bikes, it's just a game change. The world's
Yeah,
changed.
oh, for
Um,
sure.
do you think a lot of that stuff, more so today, compensates for bad technique as well?
It can do, yeah, quite a lot. Um, it eventually runs out, though. All
Right.
these things have an intended use. Say like a Ducati, my favorite example is the 1299 Panigale. It's an absolute brute of a motorcycle. It's got all this torque and all this power with a fairly unforgiving chassis. Now, it's also got a sublime electronics package. It's amazing what the electronics can do at a standard level. As a rider comes off, good example is Morgan Park, turn 7. It's a sharp 90 degree sort of corner to the left, and it kind of crowns a crest. So the road surface goes from camber to off camber slightly.
Right.
A lot of riders of, say, amateur level or average novice track day, they'll wait till the bike's pointed around the corner all the way and then they hit the gas hard. Now, that induces obviously a wheelie, and bikes are really prone for wheelies. So then the
Particularly in that
electron,
area there.
yeah, yeah. But also in general, then motorcycles are really prone to wheelies and head shakes, and they're a lot of fun, but they're to get the best out of them.
Maybe that's the goal.
Yeah, maybe. But the key is that when you learn to apply the throttle better
Right.
earlier in the corner,
Yeah.
the factory programmed electronics allow you to accelerate more.
Right.
Even though you're giving more throttle and more power and more edge of the tire, the fact you're doing it in a much smoother fashion means electronics can go, hey, that's cool. We can just keep going. And the
Right.
bike will carry this beautiful half foot off the ground wheelie all the way out. But if you nuts the throttle really hard, the
Mm.
bike will instantly went wheelie and cut your power. So now the bike is getting in the way.
Yeah.
It's designed to help it to a certain rider style or skill level. Otherwise, it's literally just a safety feature at that point.
Yeah. It's also it's important to recognize too, and people to realize that these electronics, they don't stop you from crashing. You can
No,
still crash.
yes, that's right. And
And
that's the thing. BMWs, if you gas hard, they will throw a big wheelie. If
yeah,
you
right.
roll the throttle on, it doesn't wheel at all and gives you peak acceleration.
Yeah.
It's a predefined algorithm they've programmed at the factory, obviously, to go hand in hand with someone who has skill at what they're doing.
Yeah.
And that's not to say no one's got any skill. We all do. Otherwise, it'd all be in the weeds every time we ride the bike.
Yeah, right.
But there's an element to consider that your ride technique can allow you to do a lot more with what you've got, basically.
Yeah. You said like, it seems to me like you got involved in motorcycle, quite a long time ago, but then you went into the coaching side of it very early.
Yep.
Then the suspension side of it crept in with Ride Dynamics. And then and correct me if I'm wrong, you said you went away from the coaching more so into the suspension, but now you've come back into there. What
Yeah.
was it that took you away from the coaching and got you into the suspension in the first place?
Look, I'm a bit of an engineering geek. The hydraulics and all the technical aspects of it kind of took my focus,
Yeah.
more so than the science of riding, I suppose. Also, the customer work, that the requirement of what I was asked to do was more towards setting bikes up rather than working with rider technique.
Yeah.
So it just was a natural progression. And now the business is well established, and it's known quite a lot now. I'm now getting people asking me, can you help me with my writing technique? And
Yeah.
so again, the work is just taking me that direction. And I love both of it. I love all of it. I love the
Yeah.
understanding the psychological aspect and how it impacts a rider. For me, there's no more pure form of motorsport than motorcycle racing. You got a really fast car. An average driver can do quite well in it. You get a really fast motorcycle, an average
Yeah.
rider still won't win a race, but you get a slow motorcycle with a really fast rider, they can
Yeah.
still win a race. And that's what I like the interplay between the rider and the bike.
Yeah. I heard it once described like surfing, they surfers like motorbikes and motorbike riders like surfing because it's
Yeah,
that body bike, body board interaction. Uh,
correct. That's right.
has
A
to
lot
be.
of my customers are surfers. Yeah, that's right.
That's interesting, isn't it? Well, you
Yeah.
do live on the Gold Coast, mate.
Oh, I know. But there's a lot of people out west that still come to see me, and they still love to surf. They make the
Yeah.
drive out and surf.
Yeah,
So
interesting.
it's I think it's just that fluid motion of your body, going through the lefts and rights and curves and so forth.
Yeah. Well, I know you're riding, mate, and I've seen you coach. I know people can't go far wrong coming to you for that type of thing.
No, thank you.
A couple of questions for you. Like you're involved in coaching riders and talking about technique as well as setup and things like that. Everybody's got an opinion. You know what I mean? There's like
Cool.
a million opinions, and everyone's got them. What's that saying? They're like arseholes. Everyone's
Yeah.
got one. Got an
Spot on.
how do you deal with that? The fact that opinions are coming around, are floating around everywhere, and you see it. In fact, my memory just went to a recent one I saw where someone posted a picture of their rear tire, and they said, "What's happening here?" And oh my God, I read the comments. It's
Yeah,
just crazy.
it
How do you
is.
deal with all of that stuff? And how do you advise people?
Sure. So we've got every suspension technician out there didn't start out as a suspension tech. They didn't leave school going, I'm going to be a suspension tech. They come from a different background. Majority of them I see they're an engineer of some kind. It's a pretty exacting science, but where the black art of it comes into is decrypting a rider feedback, turning that into a mathematical equation on a motorcycle. That's
Yeah,
the art of it. And so if you can get on the same wavelength as a rider, that job becomes a lot easier. If the rider has better feedback for you, then it's a lot easier as well. So realistically, I encourage people though to play with it, to try and get an understanding of what they're doing on a motorcycle, and take responsibility for it. You can ask all the questions you like, but if someone gives you a bit of advice, try it, but don't take it as gospel. Doesn't matter where it's come from. It's not gospel.
mm,
There's I always put it this way: MotoGP, you got 23 bikes on the grid, 23 riders, 23 teams. These are the best guys in the world. They're all within a second of each other. So who's right, who's wrong here? Who's got the best setup and who's got the best bike? Well, it comes down to the best combination on the day. And when we start talking about all these varied styles and varied ideas, well, really, you could take a bit from here, a bit from there, and a bit over there, and formulate your own story. That's what I encourage people to do. I'm never going to profess I'm going to be the best guy in the world at what I do, and I'm not. There's always something to learn. Anyone that says there is ignorant of the fact there's always more to learn.
yeah,
Um, so, you know, if I impart wisdom or knowledge or understanding to someone and it resonates with them, that'll help them along the way. But then somewhere else along the way will have the same ability with a different level of input. And so I think ultimately I encourage people to do all different courses they can do. If they can learn one nugget of wisdom out of that day, then it's money well invested.
yeah,
Um, if they feel like they're coming to a store point in bike development with me, by all means, go with someone else. If they doesn't work out, they can always come back. And then if they've got new ideas, well, then I've learned something new too, and we all grow basically.
yeah.
So that's the key: is to take on everything, but weed out the shit and develop your own idea and your own story and how you're going to do it. Because there's no right or wrong here.
No. I struck this with I made a video on steering, right? And then people have got different views, just steering a motorcycle and there's all these different views of how you do it. And one thing I realized is that everyone's correct in their own context. What you don't get is their context. And the second thing is they're giving you a piece of advice that may be a different context. So for example, you can steer a bike at 10 kilometers an hour
Yep.
in any way. You can stand beside the bike and put, you know what I mean? You can do anything and you get
Yeah.
and it works.
Yep.
Whereas at 200 kilometers an hour, probably only one technique really works to turn that motorcycle. So it's getting that, not only the snippet, but understanding the context in which it was applied, because they're probably correct, for their scenario.
Well, the thing is that even at 200 k's an hour, you can steer it more way than one, more way than one.
Right.
It's whether or not it's efficient or effective is a different story.
True.
You
True.
know, you could there's always this big argument for peg weighting
Yeah.
and counter steering and body leaning, right? They're the three main aspects of steering a motorcycle. Now, at low speed, where the bike is very dynamic and it wants to topple over all the time, and the gyroscopic forces aren't at play from the motorcycle,
Yeah.
you could put all your weight on one side of the bike and the bike will fall over that direction.
Right.
And that's fine. But as the gyroscopic forces of the wheels come into play, as the speed increases, that bike wants to go straight. It just wants to be stable. It's like a spinny top spinning really fast. It doesn't want to change any direction, it just stays there spinning.
Yeah.
Motorcycles doing the same thing. So you're jumping on one side. There's a lot of forces at play that say, no, let's keep going straight. So now we start to have to work with the bike's machine design, which is the fork angle, the caster of the fork or the rake of the fork, and moving that contact patch or that sense of direction away from its center line.
Yeah.
Now it's going to enforce a different action the opposite way. And that's what counter steering is. And that becomes very effective to make that bike change direction. You're using the bike's own forces to do the job.
Right. The most
And
effective way to do it.
so, some people's reality is weighting foot pegs.
Yeah.
And that's fine. But how long they take to go from upright to maximum lean angle needed will take longer than the person counter steering.
Yeah.
But, the difference is too that if you are violent in what you do, you can cause an issue with the motorcycle there. So if you jam on the handlebar really hard, well, then that bike's going to want to shake and shimmy and carry on. And possibly at that point, it can't deal with it. So it'll crash,
Yeah.
whereas pushing foot pegs is a very slow progression, allows the tire to keep its contact and grip all the time. So it's horses for courses and where you're going to do it, basically.
Yeah. Right.
And it
Do
really
you,
depends.
what you were talking about, what was it, being in the same wavelength or something as the rider? And that's particularly important when they're giving feedback.
Yeah,
What's the best way for a rider to give feedback? I mean, what types of things are you looking for? Let's just say I'm out on track riding around and I don't like the handling of the bike or something. What's the best form of feedback for you as the person who's not on the bike to
sure.
be able to answer questions and provide tips and
Yeah,
guidance?
yeah, good question. So basically, you want to be able to tell the person working on your bike where exactly it's happening and how it's happening, rather than, oh, it just doesn't turn in. Okay, well, that's great. But where? What corner particularly is it not turning in
So
worse?
you're really giving the context of it.
Correct. Yeah. And I'll ask a lot of questions. If I don't have the information I need, I won't just make a blind guess at it. I'll
Yeah.
then start going to a deeper question. So let's say, for example, I can't get the bike to turn in high speed. Okay. Which corner is that? It's through the fast section, 7, 8, 9, 10 at Morgan Park.
Yeah.
Okay. Which one's worse? Oh, I can't get it to turn into turn 9. I can't get it to apex. All right. So are you on the brake at that point? Are you off the brake? Are you on the throttle? All these things will dictate the direction we need to take this bike.
Right.
If we're on the throttle and the bike is refusing the whole line, we can start looking at the rear of the bike in terms of ride height, spring rates. If the bike won't turn in where you're on the brake, well, then we start looking at the front spring rate, front ride height. If we're neutral on the throttle or we're neutral, sort of floating or coasting through the corner, we start looking at geometry of the motorcycle a bit more.
Yeah.
So, and then, there's a pro and con. So whatever we do to fix that will change something else somewhere else. And so you then start to back the question up. This is if you've got a rider with very general feedback. You've got to then balance, okay, if we fix this, how's his riding somewhere else? And so you go, okay, struggling to turn into turn 9. Okay, great. So we can lower the front of the motorcycle to sharpen the steering up, or soften the preload in the front, something like that. But how is it on the way into turn 4? Oh, it's already feeling a bit nervous on the way in. Okay, well, that will not fix what we're looking for over the whole racetrack. It'll fix turn 9, but it'll make turn 4, turn 6, turn 2 worse. So your overlap time will probably be slower at that point. So then you have to balance that out. So you've got to extract the information from the person. So if a rider, to help your suspension tech, you have to give more concise feedback. Where is it happening mostly? Is it on the brake into turn 9? Is it on the throttle out through turn 9? Both
Right.
are still understeering, but it's a very different way to address it.
So saying to you the bike's handling like crap isn't the way to get feedback to be able to get a tip because that's meaningless.
It'll give you four track days worth of crap handling before we start getting somewhere.
Right.
And when you're talking, well, for me, it cost me $1,000 every time I go to the racetrack. set of tires, half a set of brake pads, entries, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So it's $1,000 a pop. Now you work it out. If you want to give shitty feedback, it takes you 4 or 5 track days to even start getting the right direction. You just blown 5 grand to do that.
Right.
So it takes, the rider needs a little bit of ownership of it. Try and be aware of where the shortfall is.
Do you ever find that people aren't aware of what's happening? Because, I've struck this as, as a coach as well. It's where, you know, you talk to people about their observations through a corner and it's like, it's not there. It hasn't registered or something. Do you ever strike that? How do you
Yeah,
deal
for
with it?
sure. All the time. And that's where the probing questions come into it. You ask questions to make them, I suppose, open their eyes to realize
Right.
what's going on. And sometimes, you've got to be a little bit more, I suppose, arrogant and go, look, I know where the problem is, but I need you to realize it too before we can move forward.
Right.
There's no point me just making changes and send you back out blindly. Even as a coach, to say to someone who thinks they're tipping in at this point, that if they tipped in later, it'd be better. Their their reality is where they is the right spot. At some point, you do have to say, sorry, but try a bit later.
Yeah.
Try it, see how it goes. I want you to do it later. This is why. And that's part of it too. You've got to explain why. You can't just tell them how. You've got to tell them why.
Yeah.
And then that gives them education. And you find the next time you're dealing with them, they're far more receptive, but also have a better input to what they're doing
Yeah.
in terms of where's it working, where's it not. They understand better why.
Yeah. Do you, when you're making adjustments and, going out and trying things, do you do it in multiple changes or do you one change at a time and then go and ascertain what it produces? I think, out in the business world, they call this a one factor at a time experiment. So you
Yep.
know exactly what's causing it. So what's your approach when it comes to motorcycle suspension?
Well, that's the thing. A rider and motorcycle is holistic. It's one unit. One change can affect the whole thing. So we tend to err on the side of one change at a time,
Right.
because it throws the whole thing out. Like I said, if you lower the front of the motorcycle, it may fix your turn into turn 9, but then turn 4, it's too nervous on the front, and the rider won't have any confidence to push.
Yeah, right.
So you really want to try and do one thing at a time. Obviously, sometimes we have time constraints. We only have 5 sessions in a day or 3 races or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
So you might try and speed up the process by doing 2 things at once. But then if the problem is fixed, what fixed it?
Which one? Yeah.
Yeah. And so it really depends on, I suppose, on the rider's feedback and how much time we have spare. If we're trying to get to an end solution very quickly, then we might do a couple of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a fair point. Do you does this apply, a lot of this stuff, I realize the importance of, suspension setup, particularly, at the limits of traction and pushing hard on a track. Is this important for street riders as well?
Of course, yeah. Ultimately, we're looking at traction. We're looking at grip.
Yeah,
Now, if you could have double the grip, would you say you're going to have a safer riding experience?
you would think so, yeah.
Right. So ultimately, we're trying to. The end goal of suspension is to keep them tires loaded and
Yeah,
connected to the ground at all times.
right.
That's the end goal. The better we can have them loaded in the right way, because you can overload them, but in that right working zone, the right temperature zone of the tires. Therefore, the safer your riding experience will be,
Yeah,
and ultimately easier. The bike will do its thing better. So, as a street rider goes, I always get no, I'm no racer. Yeah, I get racer, that's fine. But if we make the bike track the ground better, you're gonna have a safer ride and ultimately come home sooner and happier.
yeah, right. Which is the the ultimate objective, isn't it?
Correct. That's right. And all suspension is in the most simplistic term is setting the bike up to suit your weight, your height, your riding style to maximize that grip performance on the motorcycle.
Yeah, right.
Road, track, doesn't matter. It's all the same.
How does a street rider know that they should do something about the suspension? What sort of things would they be looking for? What would be a clue?
Sure. So most of the time when people come into the shop, they're looking for comfort.
Right.
And usually if they're, let's say, a guy who rides on the highway or sort of open roads and, out the back somewhere, um, they're looking for comfort and compliance. And what you'll find is that it's too stiff or it's actually too soft. And they're hitting the bottom of the stroke all the time. There
Yeah.
you get that bike to work in the middle zone properly. All of a sudden the ride's more compliant, more comfortable, but at the same time they've got better grip and better handling characteristics. So
Right.
guys who run in the mountains and in the twisties and so forth, where they're starting to urge more towards like a track rider, where they're using the bike for performance. Now we're having to deal with management of the weights of the motorcycle pitching forwards and backwards, the rider moving around on top of it as well.
Yeah.
So generally, they'll tell you that it's really harsh on bumps coming into corners, or it wants to wheel spin all the time. Like it slides around heaps. It's the same sort of feedback as what an average track day punter would give you. It's just that on the road, we have so many varied aspects to deal with. So it's got to be a more generalized setting, so to speak.
Yeah.
But generally, it's rider led. They'll come in and say, oh, it's pretty good everywhere, but some big bumps just really hurt me. It's really harsh. And then you're checking, we're using all the straight, we're bottoming the shop. So now we can make changes, stick a spring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like it's a compromise too, isn't it? I mean, there's never one setting that's going to do everything.
No, that's right.
A bit of a compromise. If a street rider, they do commute on their bike and they do a bit of range riding or something, then they go to track and do a track day.
Yep.
Would you suggest that they make changes to suspension?
It really depends how often they're doing each thing. Now, generally, this is 95% of people on the road. If they go to work a couple of days a week and then they ride the hills, I ask them straight up, what is the priority here? Do you want comfort going to work, or do you want to go to the mountains and blast hills? And if they say work, well, then the spring rates usually come in half a rate softer than what we would do for, say, someone blasting hills.
Right.
It's not massively soft or undersprung, but it's not overly stiff either. And so in the hills, they can add a turn or two of preload, and it gets where they need to be. Most people don't, they just set and forget. They just go, just give me a setup I can ride to work and go play in the hills. So then it becomes my job to find that happy medium. But unfortunately, you can't have a commuter motorcycle and a race bike at the same time, or a track bike.
Yeah, so true.
Unless we start putting magnetic suspension on motorcycles with variable coil inputs and so forth to springs, it's never going to happen. You can't have one thing do everything. It's impossible.
I think people don't realize that if you get a bike sitting in the middle of a suspension range commuting, you put that on a track even on ranges, hard riding and ranges and that, it's going to push right down in the suspension.
Yes.
Much more cornering, load in the corners. There's no one bike that's going to do it all.
That's right. And I noticed BMW got something pretty clever with I think the new GSs.
Adaptive height.
Yeah, it's a good and bad thing what they're doing. So they're putting in a rear shock, you got a remote reservoir or a canister, a piggyback canister on it, right? And that's normally got nitrogen gas in there.
Yeah.
And so as the shock compresses, the shaft goes into the shock body and it displaces fluid, so it ends up in the canister. And the gas pressure in the back of it compresses. And then as it extends again, the oil goes back into the main body.
Yeah, right.
Now, that gas pressure is in effect a spring in itself. So if you double the gas pressure, that shock will be a lot harder to use or compress than one at a normal gas pressure rating. So BMW have gotten into the idea of putting an extra spring inside that canister, and it allows it then to effectively stiffen the spring rate when the loads get too high. Now, that's clever, but it's flawed because it becomes too stiff at certain situations.
Yeah, right.
So again, they're trying to address both things, but they're actually losing at both things at the same time. So instead of being brilliant at one thing and not so good at another, they're average at both. And sometimes that doesn't work for some people. Yeah. So you end up taking that spring out and putting a proper spring on there, and a person gets a better result out of it because that becomes a tailored package to what they're doing.
Yeah. Would that be okay for, the average rider out there?
Yeah, generally. Yeah.
Good thing for them, but not so much for, a good rider.
Yeah, spot on. And that's what I mean. You're better off with a tailored package regardless. All the electronic suspension in the world allows everyone to jump on and press a button, and it makes it a little bit better, but it's never going to be the magic bullet that does everything. Yeah. And, I'm going to the mountains now. I'll press this button. It makes it very easy just to shift that platform or the base setting to firmer riding.
Yeah.
But then, it's still not spot on in that regard versus a bike that's properly sprung to suit you, valved and set up to suit you better.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a long way forward than just what we used to have, which was just basically a rebound clicker with some preload and no one ever touched them.
Yeah. They, a few bikes started to creep out with a few things like that. Like one of my mates' riding buddies got a Multistrada, and it's got the wind-up dial. It's really easy to adjust. and
Yep.
they recommend when you get a pillion, you wind it
Yes.
in 5 turns, 6 turns, or something like that.
Yep.
So, I think they've always people were accommodating the changes that were necessary when you change the load on the bike and things like that.
Yep.
I know on the GS I got an older one. I run it with luggage, basically like it's got luggage because it
Yep.
has. I think it adjusts preload on the rear end electronically. So it has a little motor there, winds it up to 20 millimeters. So
Yes.
10 mil for baggage and then another 10 mil for a pillion.
Yep.
So I'll whack it up anyway because it's perfect when it's without the pillion and the
Spot
baggage.
on. Yep.
Um, Regarding these track riders and street riders and things like that, the if they're going to, what advice would you give someone who wants to take their street bike and put it on track around suspension? What would be the number one thing you would tell them?
Okay. I'll quantify if it's their very first time on track, then just make
Right.
sure your tire pressures are set. Go ride your bike.
Okay.
Because you don't need to be wondering if your bike's working or not. There's a lot of things going on. You want to ride the package you're most familiar with.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, when we go to the racetrack, we ride a bit harder, so the tires get worked harder, so their pressure rises more. So just make sure the tire pressures are in the right ballpark still. There's no point going out at 42 psi in the rear and then giving it a hard time. That tire's going to be approaching the 50 psi.
Right.
Not going to work. So bring it down. As you know, as a coach at Superbike School, the guys who come out the track, they're just average road riders, they're just normal guys on their normal road bike with road tires. We drop into 30-30 front and rear. It's a good, safe headway for growth and heat expansion.
Right.
The
Because it's going
bikes
to
are
get
still
a lot
standard road
hotter
bikes.
on the track.
Yeah, correct. But the bikes are still standard road bikes. And how many of them do you think have adjusted their motorcycle for track riding?
Mm.
They haven't. They've just ridden out. And it's actually the best way to do it. For the first time out,
Yeah.
you're better off with the devil you know. You know how that bike behaves. You've been riding it forever and a day to work, up the mountains, wherever else. If you decide that track riding is your thing and you want to take it more seriously, well, then you start looking at firming things up because ultimately we're riding more aggressively. Our inputs are more aggressive than they ever would be on the road.
Yeah.
Instead of picking up the throttle at 2%, 6%, 18%, 40% increment, we're going straight to 15%, 40%, 100%. That's a lot of load or input to that motorcycle at that point. You've got to make allowance for it. So, guys who are first time they're trying track riding, forget it. Tire pressures, go to ride your bike. Now, if you feel like something's happened during the day, you might make it firm up a little bit. People who do 3 or 4 times a year, you might add a bit of preload, so you're damping down just a tiny bit. But anything more than that, you start looking at proper setups, and you should take it somewhere and get at least a baseline setup for track work, and have that person give you the difference between your road setting and your track setting.
Here's something that's creeping out or becoming more apparent to me, and that is with the introduction of 60 profile tires.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can get up to 65 now on the street, can't you?
Yep.
So sorry for
For a rear, like a
not a
200.
type. Yeah, correct. So if someone goes from a 50, 55 profile to a 60 or 65 profile, does that affect the handling of the bike? And should they make changes to suspension?
Yeah, it does make a massive change in the bike. And particularly if you say you were running your 120/70 front, the standard size front, and you go
Right.
slap a 265 rear on the back. So, like um, a 200, sorry, a 190/55, it's about 114 mil tall, 108 mil tall on the tire profile. Now you go to 265, now that's 120 mil. So you just raise the back of that motorcycle up 12 millimeters.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden that weight has been taken away from the back of the motorcycle. It's now in the front of the motorcycle. So that bike's going to have a tendency to understeer on the brakes in the corners. It's got too much load, too much pressure on that front tire. Can't deal with turning.
Right.
So if you marry that up with the corresponding front, which let's say we're talking Pirelli here, 265 rears, their fronts are 125/70. That tire is about 4 mil taller in the sidewall height.
Right.
So now you may shift that weight transfer 8 millimeters to the front rather than 12 like you were before. So to keep your bike's handling dynamic, you would either lower the rear of the motorcycle down or raise the front of the motorcycle.
Right.
Now, for my mind, I would rather raise the front of the motorcycle, gives you more trail, a bit more stability in the front of the bike, particularly for track work. Because the ultimate reason why we're going for that 265 rear is a much bigger footprint on the edge of the tire.
Right.
So let's use it. If we lower the rear of the motorcycle, well, it's not as effective as raising the front at that point because we're then
Yeah.
keeping that trail and that turning ability of the motorcycle to maximize the drive.
Yeah. It's interesting. Someone once said to me, like 10 or 12, because I've measured the difference between a 55 and a 60 and a 65. And they go, 10 mil doesn't make much difference. They go, you drop your forks, your triple clamp, 10 mil down your forks, and you watch what difference it makes.
Yeah,
It will
that's right.
change your world.
It does. It
Yeah.
does massively. And the other thing we do by we raise the rear via this big tire. Okay, that's great. Now we want to save a bit of weight of the front tire to stop that understeering sensation. So we'll lower the rear. But when we do that, we lose our swing arm angle, which is
Right.
our anti-squat value, so to speak.
Yeah.
So it becomes more prone to wheelies off turns, or squatting more and pushing you wider off corners.
Yeah.
So even though you've gone to a bigger tire, you may have better drive grip, but you may find you push wider in corners, and therefore you can't commit the throttle as much as you want it.
Right.
This is why we will raise the front of the motorcycle to get that braking stability back that we like, while maximising that drive still.
Yeah. Interesting. There's so many options, and every one of them changes something.
It does, and everything has a pro and con. There's no such thing as a free lunch here with this. You've got to, if you make a change, you have to accept there'll be a negative impact somewhere else,
Yeah.
and,
Right.
and ultimately it just comes down to the best compromise.
Yeah.
That's ultimately where riding the bike, we are the biggest tool available to handling a motorcycle. We can, set the bike up tall at the front, so it's lazy, not much weight in the front, but we can shift our body weight forward and look over the screen and hang off, and that can bring that balance back. So um, it's about finding the best compromise in the motorcycle, and then we can make up the difference with our mass or body mass transferring.
Right. Do you think that actually let me rephrase that. I've been talking to, people up here about handling and, bike setup and things like that. Not giving them advice, but just discussing the topics of
Yep.
it. And a question that comes up a fair bit is, can someone with a modern bike, a BMW, something like the one I've got in the back here, whatever, with stock suspension, are there things you can do to stock suspension that make it work better over and above going and buying cartridges and replacing the suspension?
Yeah, for the most part, yes. For example, of your BMW, the rear shock, particularly the electronic shock, the DDC shock,
Yeah.
um, their problem is that the way they're designed, there's no piston and shims to revalve. It's a solid cylinder with a series of holes drilled in the side of it. Excuse me. And so as you're adjusting the damping profile, there's a needle inside that's closing off certain holes
Right.
or changing the amount of flow past these holes. And that's changing damping characteristics. The amount of oil can fit through that gap is reduced, therefore you've got more dampening going on. Unfortunately, as a tuner goes, you can't really change that unless you're willing to get the drill bits out and start drilling these holes for different sizes.
Yeah. Right.
So we're limited. The front's got a standard style shim stack, which you can revalve. But the cartridge itself, BMW never intended you to get in there and play with it. It's a sealed unit, gas sealed.
Yeah. Right.
They expect you to do about 100,000 Ks and throw it in the bin and buy another one. So it's a non-serviceable item. You can do it. It takes modifications to do so.
Right.
And it resets the whole damping profile and curves to whatever you've done. But the rear shock's almost not really tuned well than changing oil weights more so. But then you go to something like, I don't know, say current model GSX-R 1000R with the balance-free fork and the balance-free shock. The core components are really good. The design is a good design. It's just set quite poorly from factory for serious track work.
Hmm.
So particularly the rear shock, they lack a severe amount of rebound damping. So you can pull them apart, you can valve them and make them work really well without the expense of buying a $2,500 aftermarket shock. We get it often. We'll put a set of carts in the front for people and we'll just rework the shock and they still win races just the same.
Yeah. Wow.
Ultimately, the difference between OEM and your aftermarket componentry is heat management. Suspension's job is to turn that kinetic energy into thermal energy. That's what it's doing. It's taking that bump, slowing it down. That creates friction, creates heat, dumps the heat into the oil, then it dumps it atmosphere. So that's the low path of it all. So aftermarket gear will do half hours with a racing and hours with a racing before it's really cooking and starting to fade. Your OEM stuff will do 10 laps, sort of 15 minutes and starts to fade. So whether or not your races are long enough to warrant that time frame of needing aftermarket gear, if you're not the caliber of needing aftermarket gear, you can definitely get a great result, much cheaper,
Yeah.
and supportive enough for a race distance by reworking the standard stuff.
Right. Interesting. So
And it,
what I heard there is that the ability to even do anything with the suspension, the factory suspension, OEM suspension, depends on the bike itself as well. So some
yeah,
you can, some you can't.
yep,
But
yep,
if you're a serious track day rider, you're probably better off getting, the proper suspension. I would assume.
yeah. Well, let's say your BMW, for example,
Yeah.
because we can't really get into the nitty gritty of fine tuning to suit you. That it becomes a case of let's just put aftermarket gear in there.
Yeah.
Now, I know there's a lot dearer to do so, and all these sort of things, but the fact is that heat management of the shock, for example, after 5 or 6 track days, you're starting to really buy back that cost in tire wear. You're
Yeah.
saving a lot of money because once that shock starts to heat fade and not do the job so well, the only thing that does the job now is the tire, and so the tire's got to work harder. Therefore, it's shedding rubber quicker.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So your 2.5 grand shock seems dear at the start, but by the sort of 18th month, 2 years into it,
Yeah.
you've got to recoup that cost and save tire wear. Because let's face it, set of Pirelli slicks are like $800 retail these days. It's a
I'm
lot of
hearing
money.
I'm hearing a case to put to the missus about new suspension.
There you go. It's safer too. Safety always works.
Back to your business, Ride Dynamics. I noticed this. I was thinking about this morning. I noticed, you're pretty active in posting stuff, and it's awesome. Some of the photos are great, and the commentary, and I really take an interest in it. What I did have noticed is new equipment, new tools, and things like that. I mean, how much of a challenge is it for you to keep up to date with equipment and tools, and what advances are happening in that space? Because it seems like there's changes.
Yeah, yeah. It's honestly, it's no challenge for me because I'm a tool nut.
If it's
I,
shiny, you like.
if it's a new specific tool that only does one function, I'll still buy it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
I've got drawers full of random specific tools for certain brands of suspension that I use maybe twice a year.
yeah. Wow.
The tool might cost me $1,000 to have it, but I've got to have it. And ultimately, I like to do a really good job, and I hate
Mm,
dodging anything up. And so for me to go, I need a special pin spanner for this job. Well, I could probably dodgy something up or use a set of universal pin spanners, or I can just call the importer and say, "Can I have that tool, please?" And then I know that I'm not going to damage the shock. Some of these shocks will be $5,000 or more.
yeah,
You don't want to put marks on them any more than you need to, basically. So that's why it's easy just to keep up with it because I know that ultimately the job I do is better with the right tools in hand.
yeah. Right. How do you keep up to date with it? I mean, actually stay in line with it because it seems
So
to me like I'm
yeah,
a motor mechanic and I see it as well because
yep.
you get hit with Instagram ads and you go, man, I wish I had that tool like 10 years
Well,
ago.
that's what happens. I see it and I buy it straight away. I don't care. I just buy. Look, aftermarket side is a lot easier because when a company brings a component to market, they will also have available the tools to work on it.
Yeah.
And so, like just recently, I just took on a Viturbo in my workshop and components, and we did a introduction day with Viturbo. They flew one of the head engineers out of Italy. And we did 3 days of intensive training on how to pull it apart, play with it, what you're looking for, etc. By end of the day, end of the 3 days, I said, "Yeah, I'll sell the product." But there and then, I signed up and bought 2.5 grand worth of tools.
Yeah. Right.
I haven't even sold a product yet. But the fact is that if I'm going to invest my time in it, I want to be able to work on it and
Yeah.
work on it well. So I just bought it. When you're talking OEM, though, it's a very different story. The
Yeah.
OEMs don't want you touching these things. There's tools available, but they're a lot harder to find.
Yeah. Right.
Uh, and sometimes you end up making tools. And in a past life, I was a boiler maker and a sheet metal worker, and then a production engineer. So I spent a lot of time on lathes and milling machines and so forth over the years. So if I've got to make something, I'll make something.
Yeah.
But invariably, it's always cheaper to buy it.
Yeah. Well, you get an advantage if you're a boilermaker. You got some skills there.
Yeah, yeah, it helps. It helps.
Uh,
Uh,
the, the adjustments I made as a motor mechanic when I was a tradesman was if it bent into shape, it was correct.
Yeah.
In activity.
It's a
Um,
good point until we're talking about a very expensive aluminium canister.
yeah, 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 yeah. You talked about products because I think I saw a photo. I think you posted a photo attending that workshop. There was a guy doing a presentation there. Um, the question that came to mind from that is, what products, in the ranges of suspension do you sell?
Everything.
Yeah, and why did you? Oh, so like K-Tech. I know K-Tech's pretty prominent in
Yeah,
your.
I do a lot of K-Tech. That is kind of my main bread and butter, I suppose. But I sell all products just about because I've always believed that you match the best product to the customer's requirement,
Right.
regardless. Doesn't matter what brand it is. And I've had brands try and corner me to just sell their item, give me a better discount on buying it, blah, blah, blah. I've had them in the past where I have, been mainly say K-Tech or whatever, right? And another brand comes along and says, oh, if you receipt on that, we'll give you a better deal on our product.
You're
I
right.
don't care.
Yeah.
I sell pretty much everything. K-Tech is my favorite to use on the racetrack. It just seems to have the best um, overall performance for
Right.
our tracks. We have bumpy tracks, we have tight tracks, and the K-Tech DDS product, for example, just has this massive working window. You can almost set and forget from 90% of the country.
Wow.
Um, and it's fantastic in that regard. It's dearer, but it's the least stressful in terms of the average punter having going down to Phillip Island and going up to Moreland Park and various setups needed, but the suspension seems to work well for minimal input, basically.
And Josh Waters is doing pretty good with it. I think Josh
Yeah,
is on K-Tech.
yep, it's fantastic stuff. Essentially, K-Tech's developed around Isle of Man and British Superbike. Now, Isle of Man, for example, one side of their loop is smooth and fast and flow. The other section is rough as guts, bumpy, doing bridge jumps and first
Mm.
gear corners. The suspension's got to work everywhere. It
Well,
can't just
British
work somewhere.
British tracks are probably similar to Australian tracks as well. It's not like
Yes.
the European tracks.
Yeah, that's right. They're not. We haven't got smooth billiard ball sort of prepped bitumen everywhere that is 50 meters wide.
Yeah.
A lot of our tracks are like you said, like British tracks.
Mm.
If anything, British tracks are probably still worse in many places.
They're about as wide as my driveway, some of those.
Correct. Yeah. And so, that's why I like the product.
Yeah.
For my end user, you put a set of springs in that work properly for their weight.
Yeah.
They can go anywhere and do a ride day, and they're going to be pretty happy wherever they go. Obviously, the further you go up the grid and to the faster pointing end of the table, changes need to be made. But for 80% of track riders, you can almost get away with a set and forget, and a minor tweak here and there as you go, as you get better, and so forth. And that's why I like it. Öhlins is a very easy to work on product. As a tuner goes, you can revalve a set of forks in 20 minutes trackside. It's not, you
Wow.
can't disassemble and spec every last detail, but you can get the change you need trackside quite quickly and easily, which is handy because you need to make changes often with Öhlins products, I find. Um, but then, some people don't have the budget for these high end things, but you get a very good sort of 80% of the result buying, say, a Nitron or a YSS or whatever else. Now, this new stuff I've just taken by Tubo, they've got a range that's cheap and they've got a range that's expensive, and the performance indicators reflect that. Their high end stuff is as good as anything else you can think of. Their lower end stuff is as good as whatever's in that price category as well. So
Right.
it's nice. It's nice to have a product that covers nearly all bases, basically. So I've always been a fan of matching the product to the end user's requirement. That's why I carry 25 different suspension brands, basically.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah,
I I got no other questions. Like you've pretty much loaded my brain up with a lot of good info there.
that's all right.
I covered every question I had. If people, probably the main part for me to ask you now is if people want to, get in contact with you, they want to interact with Ride Dynamics, whether it be suspension or coaching or anything like that. How do they do that? Where do they go?
Sure. Probably the easiest way to get hold of me is via the Facebook Messenger on the Ride Dynamics Facebook page.
Yeah.
Um, Emails are my worst thing you can contact me on.
Yeah.
I'm still very much on the tools every day. I'm on the tools sometimes 16 hours a day. So for me to stop and sit at the computer and type things out, I don't have the time.
There's
Um,
no money getting paid when you sit and type in emails.
Correct. And I find it's a very slow form of communication.
Yeah,
I have a, it's great for making things formalized, and
yeah,
that's fantastic. But as a general, oh, hey, I've got a MTO7, what can I do for it?
yeah,
Well, that becomes 19 questions back and forwards on email that takes 3 days to sort out.
yeah. Bring it in.
That a 10-minute phone call will do, you know.
Yeah,
So call me or Facebook Messenger is usually the best way to get the conversation going.
yeah,
Um, but yeah, that's Instagram. I post every now and again, but I don't really, I'm not active on it, so to speak.
yeah. You've got a website?
Yep, ridynamics.com.au.
Okay,
It's outdated and I'm in the middle of updating it, so stay tuned for that one, I suppose.
mate. I got to tell you, you got the coolest t-shirts. It's the best fitting t-shirt I've had. I've got.
Yeah, they're comfy.
Very cool. Something did come to mind. What's happening at Sporties? Because you're the president out there.
I'm the president of Motorcycle Sportsmen, yes. So this year's been a big shift in what we do.
Yeah,
Uh, a whole new committee at the club running the show. We've had a lot of hard lessons to learn. We took over the running of the club with no sort of handover information, so we didn't know who to contact, who to do anything with. So we've had to learn on a very steep learning curve, but we're getting there, and we've run some successful race events in the process.
yeah,
We've brought in some new ideas and sort of expanded some classes. So it's been a boat rocking year, basically. We've really upset the apple cart a little bit in terms of how things are run.
yeah,
And I think going forward, though, we've set the club up to work better in the future. Basically, it
yeah,
was to set in its ways from the old way of doing things.
yeah. Yeah, I was aware of a few of the backstory, the bit of the backstory around that. I'm a member of the club.
Oh, good.
Yeah, so even though I live 2,000 kilometers away, I still remained a member because it was a great club when I was
Yep.
down on the Gold Coast. Why, like the people, there are people doing track days and riding down south. What's the advantages of them coming and joining a club like Sporties?
So we run events purely for members. You know, we're not a financial interest in having money in the bank and making profits. Our events are run to an exceptionally high standard. We have, on our race events, for example, we have two ambulances all the time. We have medicals and ambulances on track days. We run coaching days for our members, and they're open to general public as well. But the priority is, and the early entry is to members.
Yeah,
Um, you know, it's a club, so we're interested in fostering the community around what we do and growing and serving that community more so than just catching a average retail customer, so to speak. Um, so when you become a member of the club, you become a member of that community. You're looked after, you're fostered, you're encouraged to do more basically in terms of your own riding and what you do on a motorcycle, and also to interact with people doing the same thing.
yeah, right.
So our events are the race events basically are some of the best you run in the country. You know, we have, like I said, plenty of medical on board all the time for whatever may happen. We have a plethora of flaggies, which I'm always very appreciative of what they do.
Yeah,
Our officials are amazing. You know, they're also people that are at the top levels of ASBK. You know, so we really do try and go out of the way to make sure that our events are as good as any other event could run in the world, in Australia, basically.
yeah, right.
And so when you turn up as a member and race, you can, or a track day or whatever, you can trust the fact that we've gone out of our way to make sure your day is as safe as it can be, for as cheap as it can be for what you're getting, basically.
Yeah. What about juniors?
Yeah, well, this year, last few years, we've been lacking in that department. So this new committee that came in this year was very pro junior.
Yeah,
End of the day, this sport, generally the attendances are only getting older, not younger. And that needed to change, So
that can bite you in the long term, can't it?
certainly, certainly. And it's a fantastic sport. You know, it teaches you resilience, determination. It teaches you essentially what you put in is what you get out.
Yeah,
And that's unfortunately a lot of that's lacking in junior sports these days because a lot of it, without being too political about crap, it's too much participation awards going on. End of the day, you put the effort in, you deserve to be first. And motorcycling doesn't reward people who can't be bothered. Motorcycling rewards people who are hungry for it. That's how it works. The nature of the sport does that.
I think opinions swinging back that direction too.
Agreed. Agreed.
First is
And
first, and last is last.
correct. That's right. And even if you last, it just means that you do better. Go out and work on it. Do
Yeah,
better.
there's an
It's not
opportunity to improve, isn't there?
right. And I find working with not a little bit off topic, but working with adults even. Generally, the people I work with coaching and doing track stuff trackside, they're self-employed, somewhat successful. But every one of them say when they start focusing on their motorcycle sport, like track riding and being better at it, and it teaches them outside of that better focus. They're more successful in what they do
Interesting.
outside of it's just a mental mindset. This sport punishes you for not committing.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you go on a track day and you're half-assed out about it, generally on your ass as well. So you got to commit to the sport and focus on what you're doing. And I think it's a great thing for juniors. It teaches them in the long term, the more driven and focused they are, the more successful they'll be.
Yeah. Right.
And yeah, this year we've had Martin McGregor from Edington to the track. He's been the driving force for the QJC, the Queensland Junior Cup.
Yeah.
Spotted heavily on the OJC we have at the ASBK level. And down in South Australia, they've got the SA Junior Cup, and it's going gangbusters. And this is our first year. We've got
This is like up to 13-year-olds or something.
correct. That's right. Yeah. No, sorry, up to 16.
16.
So, yep. And so basically, it's a you pay your fee at the start of the year. The bike gets prepped, sorted, done, carted to the race events for you. You
Yeah.
turn up and ride the bike, and it's the cheapest form of junior racing you'll do. But we've got fantastic coaches on hand to keep the kids progressing. And like I said, the bikes are prepped, so they're race bikes ready to rock and roll.
Yeah.
And this year we had 5 confirmed, but we've got 4 pretty much each event racing, and we're hoping to grow that to at least 10 for next year.
Yeah.
And but yeah, it's a new initiative we've done. We haven't done anything like this before in Queensland in terms of junior development, and it's holistic. It's coaching on the Thursdays before the race event. We're trying to hold spots open for practice on Fridays,
Hmm.
and then racing Saturday, Sunday. So yeah,
It's such a cool thing because, like, I know it's huge in Spain and some of the European countries. It's regarded as a national sport, even in
yep,
Australia. It seems like there's just no attention given to it. But,
yeah,
the fact you guys are doing something about it, I think that's fantastic.
yep, yeah. Well, we've got to say thank you to the QJC sponsors, and also MQ have been massively involved
Mm.
in getting this happening as well, which is nice to see. They've really stepped up to the plate
That's
and
Motorcycling Queensland.
yes, correct. Yeah. They've seen this as a really viable thing to do. And yeah, of course, numbers are low this year, but it's our first year. And like we all expected that. And we just want to see more get out and race. And now there's an avenue to do so.
Yeah.
Beforehand, in our club, there was no junior racing for nearly 10 years. So this has been an avenue that gets us on track.
Yeah.
It's very exciting.
Now, with all this going on, like your work at Ride Dynamics and, working with students and running the club, being the president of the Sporties and all that, how's your riding going?
I don't do much of it these days. I got out yesterday morning to track day. It was good. But generally, I probably ride 5, 6 times a year.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm getting my enjoyment elsewhere, in terms of particularly a good engaging student with the rider development. I enjoy that as much as riding my own motorcycle, just about, So um, getting someone onto a new PB or better tire wear, it's still a thrill in itself.
Yeah.
And I enjoy that. And it's allowed me to not need to be riding a motorcycle right now. I'm quite
Yeah.
happy just to be that person in the pit at the moment. Don't get me wrong, it's still nice to get out and ride. But yeah,
The cool thing is, like, I've seen you ride. So, you're cruising and your bad day is a pretty fast day anyway. So it's still going to be pretty quick out there.
yeah. It's not. It's the older I am, the faster I was type things happening at the moment. But it's still,
Poor
you
old
know,
doctor.
oh yeah, like I'm still competitive. And
Yeah.
last year I took away the championship for the class I was racing in,
Yeah.
so that was still. I still want to do well in that regard.
Yeah.
But I'm now being a bit more mindful of what classes I'm racing. So this year I've taken a year off racing, but I'm building up a new bike. I've got a '05 GSX-R1000 to build up for pre-modern, which is a class we've
Oh, yeah.
introduced in sporties. So bikes from '01 to 11. Before the electronics came in and made bikes just missiles basically. And it's the cheapest form of leader bike racing you'll do. My bike, I picked up $1,500, need a little bit of work, but it'll be on track for 6 grand. And you work out the speed per dollar spent. That's a fast bike for not much money.
Yeah,
And you can
right.
still grid up and race and you'll do well on it just the same. So
I
that's what
think
I'm doing at the
I
moment.
think I saw Jason Martin riding around on a an earlier model bike with against all the modern super bikes, doing pretty well too.
We've had a long thing. I've been a pre-TK racer for many years, so bike built before 2000.
Yeah.
And the pre-TK boys take a lot of pride in the fact they're mixing it with the modern machines because we
Yeah.
can cross-enter from our pre-TK also into current superbike territory. There's been quite a few boys over the years that are inside the top five on bikes that are 25 years old, 30 years old.
Amazing, isn't it?
It is, it is. And that goes back to my very first point where
Mm.
all the modern machinery doesn't make you any faster. It makes it easier and safer.
Right.
And that's great. That's fantastic. It means that more people are able to go out there and not hurt themselves. But ultimately, if you're skilled and capable, you can take an old jigger and make it as fast. It's just a lot harder to do so.
Yeah.
And the the room for error is a lot smaller, obviously.
Yeah. That's
So,
very cool.
but yeah,
Very.
it's the old PTK bikes are very surprising, and the thing that people forget is they're still 160 odd horsepower when you tweak them. They weigh about that too, so they've got power to weight ratio very similar to modern machines. Where it falls down for them is the chassis stiffness. In that late 90s, early 2000s, bikes got so stiff in the frame that they're very unforgiving in the middle of the corner for inputs that aren't meant to be there. They just want you to brake, tip it in, hold that constant line and drive out. If you try and force the bike to steer tighter or do something else, it twists itself in knots pretty easy. And then what happens is the tires have to do the job, so you lose traction. Modern machines are so flexible. They can flex an inch sideways when fully leant over.
Really?
Yep. Yeah. So their swing arms can be pushed across nearly an inch at full lean. And what that does, it means the tire isn't trying to twist under the bike to do the job. It's just doing its perfect shape and holding grip, which means then the rider can just maintain perfect traction and good stability and good direction. That in
Amazing.
turn makes speed.
It's amazing that the whole physics and geometry of a motorcycle is intriguing.
Yep.
Like when I started riding in the 70s, they were horrible. Everything wobbled. Like
Yep.
I remember riding through the wobbles. It was just who could hold that throttle long enough.
That's all right.
And
Yeah.
the frames rubbed on the bitumen, and it was.
Yeah.
I think the rear tire was like 120 or something
Yeah.
crazy.
Well, then bikes back then, you got a free hinge in the middle of the chassis. No matter what brand you bought, you had a free hinge. And it was that's what induced that wobble, that twist and flex in the middle of the frame, where
Yeah,
the swing arm would bolt to the back of the frame.
yeah,
It
right.
would just twist it and make the wheels go different directions, basically. That induced your wobbles. These modern machines, well, I should say, as you go through to the 90s, they got so stiff that they were
Anti-aliased.
fantastic at holding direction, providing you didn't ask to do something else again.
Well, it's almost like
Now,
they went too far one way, and then they
yeah,
had to come back a little bit.
correct. That's right. And these new machines now, they're just amazing at what they do. They're edge of the tire, there's so much grip and feel there because the frame is flexing and moving. Triple clamps now allow the whole front end to twist at lean to save the fork essentially from having to do travel. Just got to remember that when a bike's well, a suspension component is dead upright and vertical, and
Yeah,
a bump hits it from the bottom, it responds quite easy. There's no side load to any of the bushings or anything like that, so that the suspension can move up and down quite supplely and quite well. When you start, let's say you put out 45 degrees, leant over, half that energy is lost vertically, and the other half then goes through the travel. But also, you need to push that suspension further than you would directly upright because obviously a triangle, that line is longer.
right.
So, let's just say a 20 mil bump, it becomes a 32 mil bump to suspension when you're at 45 degrees, but it's harder to compress it. So it doesn't want to respond to the bumps as well as you would dead upright. So having a chassis flex and move even 5 millimeters means suspension has to do 5 millimeters less. And therefore, the tire doesn't get stressed as much as well. So
Yeah,
it's
that's
very, very
interesting,
clever.
isn't it?
Yeah, very good what they're doing now. And that's probably the biggest advancement in motorcycling, even outside electronic, because you can turn electronics off on these things. And yes, they're powerful and everything else, but
Mm.
the bikes are well-behaved bikes. They do amazing things now. And the biggest advancement is the manufacturer's understanding how important chassis flex is to the job. It
Yeah,
becomes part of the suspension.
Every rider of my era and age, yeah, realizes how different it is. It's just not
Yeah.
even the same.
Yep. Yep.
Um, yeah, interesting.
Yeah. It's unreal development. And now, obviously you see these wings and aero coming out in GP, and I think the wings hang out the front are a bit of a waste of time for road use,
Mm.
but the ground effect fairing, which is what Aprilia has really been pioneering the whole time in GP, is a brilliant function to a motorcycle. It's literally sucking the motorcycle down into the ground and creating more traction than ever before. And it's easy. It's not these wings hanging out that can hit other riders or anything else and require certain directions to work better. The
Yeah.
ground effect only happens when you land the bike over, which maximizes the safety effect of it all, basically. And yeah, it's fantastic. Very clever.
You think we're early in the learning phases of that era?
Definitely. Definitely.
Is
Like I said,
that
the
how?
ground,
I mean, how long before it becomes, adaptable aero and
well, they could do that now if they wanted to, but it's banned. They
yeah,
can't do, and there's nothing adaptable in GP that's not manually controlled.
yeah,
So ride height devices, as much as I dislike them for racing, they're very clever in what they do. And they're manually controlled at least. So at least the rider's got the control over what they're doing with it. And that needs to stay that way. But, the front wings, for example, they're really good at stopping wheelies, but they push the bike into an understeer moment in the middle of the corner. They kind of push the front of the motorcycle away from the corner. So this is where you find the balance between the ground effect fairing and front wing area. And this is why now you see the GP bikes are having rear wings. It's actually to counteract the front wings at lean
that
more so
seems
than
to
anything
be
else.
the most common change at the
Yeah,
moment.
yeah. So the Ducati Stegosaurus wing, if you want to call it that,
Mm.
when you look at the bike at full lean, that's sticking dead upright. It's like a sail, basically.
Yeah, right.
And it's directing wind or air to stop the back of the bike um, pivoting into the inside of the corner, which is
Right. So
when you
it may
look
be directional as opposed to downforce.
correct, correct. So essentially, what's happening is the front wing area, when you lean it over, starts pushing the front of the motorcycle out of the corner. So if you look at a skewer run through the middle of the motorcycle as a center of axis, that pressure pushes the front away, which pushes the rear in to the corner.
Right.
Now, them wings like that give you no downforce or no drag in a straight line. But when you're leant over, it helps reduce that pivot of the motorcycle. And the new tailpiece that Aprilia has brought out is very similar in that regard. It stops that pivoting of the rear end, so it creates stability and a better direction for the rider to ride in.
Interesting.
Yeah, so they're only just scraping the surface, and realistically, um, the anti-wheelie could be easily controlled with more sophisticated electronics. We had that back in 2015, and when all the GP bikes had bespoke electronic software, and they were fantastic. And now all the wings and ride height devices and everything else we do now is just basically a mechanical way of doing what we did with electronics back then.
Yeah.
So once we start to understand, if they gave them back the electronics that they had, you'd find that they'd develop all their money towards ground effect fairing because that's what maximizes the grip in the middle of the corner. And then that means faster lap times. That's what we have now.
It's
And so,
amazing.
yeah, it's. I think a lot of people don't fully appreciate the interaction with tire load. The wings, for example, their primary goal is to stop wheelies and on coming out of corners on the front of the wings. But as you start to lean the bike, it's pushing the bike away. So it's overloading them tires and making the bike face outside the corner.
Yeah.
So they have to then do something else to push the back of the bike around to match. Now, if you could have electronics do the job instead of wheelie control and take them wings away, you'll find the riders would have a better turning ability and more chance to hold a tight line easier. And even though they may make mistakes while riding, they can do more with it because at the moment the wings kind of lock the bike into a way, and there's only one way to do something. And this is why they can't pass as easily or they feel or they can't do much. The rider sensation is saying that this is overloaded. I can't just force it tighter if I want to.
Mm.
It just locks in a position. So, and it comes as a simple term, say road track riding, like just amateur level, where we carry a lot of brake into the corner. That front tire is overloaded and locked. We're in the bottom of the travel. we can't turn the bike in. The
Mm.
bike won't want to go in. So we fix that via stiffer springs or higher oil level to get it off the bottom of the stroke so the tire's got more shape. And then we can allow that bike to turn in. Now, you imagine adding 80 kilos of downforce or pressure on the front of the bike, pushing that front tire down to the ground that hard. It's the same sensation. It doesn't want to turn in. So there's this limit that these riders, in terms of feedback, they go, I can't do much more. So they follow.
It's fascinating. It's way
Hmm.
beyond my pay grade. All this stuff. Just the fact that they identify these things is, just blows my mind.
Yeah. Active aero would be the answer, but you open up a massive rabbit hole of expense.
Yeah. I
You
saw
know,
that on is it EICMA? Well, the big
yep,
European show they had. There was a bike there with active aero, and you turn it on and all the wings come out and it moves and all that. And I thought, oh, it's gonna hit street bikes eventually, but
yeah, yeah.
whether we buy it or not, remains to be seen.
Well, your bike just looks cool, right?
Yeah.
And the idea, because let's face it, the speeds we can do on the road,
Mm.
um, they're not really doing too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just there for the look of it all.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to be doing sort of 120, 140K an hour everywhere to really feel the effect of them coming into play.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know about you, but there's not many corners out here that we can do 140 around,
No.
um, especially legally. But just road surfaces and road shapes and sizes means we don't do them sort of speeds. So they're just a selling point more than anything else
Yeah.
for road.
Now, speaking of
Like
MotoGP, who's your money on? Give me the top three in your opinion at the
top
end of the
three.
season. End of the season.
Okay, Martin for the win.
Yeah.
I think he's learnt his lessons from last year, and I think he's got enough in the tank to do it this year. Uh, you can't have a discount Bagnaia.
Yeah.
He's just that person who's always there. So he'll be, in my opinion, second. Um, even though I'm a Marquez fan, he'll go third. I just don't think
Okay.
that, yeah, I just don't think the package is there enough for him and in his first year to win it. But
Yeah.
I could be proven wrong. I think he'll do quite well. Um,
Yeah, I had the same top three. There's just a feeling about it, and that last race, kind of pointed that direction.
yeah,
Pedro Acosta.
yeah, I think he's actually going to be a top five for the year. I think he'll be fifth or fourth.
Yeah.
He really reminds me of Marquez when he came to town.
Mm,
Just has this innate feeling with the front tire,
yeah.
and just asks things of that no one else does. And I think it's because I actually had a discussion with someone else about this yesterday. Um, GP riders, the longer they stay, the more expectation they have of what a bike should do.
Yeah.
And we all do that. We all have this thing as our preconceived ideas and notions impact our ability to make a judgment call what's going on. And so as the bikes evolve and they evolve rapidly, we have this idea a bike should turn this way or have grip this way. Well, the older GP riders don't allow that to happen as the things change. They want it to be like the old way.
Yeah.
Acosta's got that sublime talent and that feeling on the front end of the motorcycle. He's just riding the absolute guts out of it, whereas the rest of them are sitting there going, "No, the front should feel this way." Acosta doesn't know any different, and that's why in that Portimao racing scene, that front end just protested the whole time, but he made it work.
Is that's interesting? Like you just made a statement then. He doesn't know any other way. He doesn't know.
Yeah,
There's that story of that student who got in late to the classroom or something, and the professor had written a puzzle or a problem up on the board. And then so the student thought it was homework, took the puzzle home, the problem home, and solved it, right? And then brought it back next day and handed in the homework. And the professor said, what's that? And then the student said, that's my homework. The professor said, no, that was an example of an unsolvable puzzle problem.
yep, yep,
And the student didn't know it couldn't be solved, so they
yep,
solved it. And I wonder, how much that affects, like you just mentioned that in the context of Pedro
yeah,
Costa. He doesn't know any different. He's grown up with electronics. Like he's
yes,
grown up with all of the modern stuff, whereas, you're probably like me. We grew up with, traction control was this.
yeah,
That's
correct.
it. There was no electronic. So
Yep,
it, the ability to crack the throttle open more in a corner, like that goes against every embedded feeling you have about, throttle
sure.
control. So
Yeah.
I think that's a big
The,
factor.
the thing for us or analog riders or people who have grown up without that sort of safety net, I suppose you call
Yeah.
it, is that you don't have the option of making an error. You
Yeah.
you nuts it too far, it lights up. Now, if you're good enough, you'll catch it. If not, you're gonna have a bad day,
Yeah.
right? And so you then learn to ride with that air of caution about how much power you're giving it. Whereas, I've broached that now. I understand what electronics do
Right.
and how they work. And like I said earlier, the better you ride, the better electronics are. They go from being a safety object to a helpful tool.
Right.
Electronics, like I said, have a preconceived idea or algorithm programmed into them. Now, if you go outside the algorithm, the first thing they fall back to is safety. And if they can't deal with that, you're on your own. Okay, so if you're on the edge of the tire in first gear and you go straight to 100% throttle, no matter what electronics package you got, you're going for a fly. You're going to be in the weeds because electronics are not programmed for that circumstance.
No,
They
not
can
not
only
on not on bikes us mere mortals ride.
no, no, and they can only catch wheel speed differences. Like 15% difference. We need a couple power.
Yeah.
If you accelerate that quickly with the tire brake traction that fast, it's too late.
Yeah.
So the electronics, the smoother you pick that throttle up on the edge of the tire, you can pick it up earlier than ever before. Yes, you can wind it on harder than ever before. Yes, but it's still that pick up smooth and wind it on. That
Right.
still has to happen. And the better you do that, the more electronics let you get away with things. And instead of then managing wheel spin, they manage wheeling. And then once you sort on the big fat part of the tire, that goes away. Your acceleration is much higher than it ever could be before.
Yeah.
So that's the key. Now, you take it back to like you're saying with the Costa and stuff, he's grown up with electronics. Maybe so, but most of them have anyway. All of them have been there long enough from the conceptual start of electronics till now.
Yeah.
They understand how it works. It's just that what's different is that all the other riders have an expectation of how the tires behave. They have an expectation of how the chassis flex works. They have an expectation of the suspension components, how they're meant to work, how the engine brake characteristic works, because they've been riding for 10 years.
Yeah.
And they all have this way. And if you go outside that way, it feels foreign. And they got to either have time to develop the feeling for that, or they try and force the bike their way. Their riding style is what they all
All right.
say in their broken translated English. Um, Acosta doesn't have any of that. Acosta is just getting on the bike with a factory KTM machine that's got all the data and all the setup and the full factory support behind it. His one goal is just to ride the shit out of it. And if he crashes it, who cares? And that allows him just to, it's all foreign and new, but he's got that adaptability and the feeling,
Yeah.
but no handbrake associated with it. And so his downfall will be just mistakes he makes because he doesn't know any different.
Yeah. Though he seems to learn quick from those,
But he does, yeah, for
like
sure.
the tire and all that he from the first round. So he's definitely a learner.
Oh, he's switched on like no one else. Yeah, and that's what I mean. It reminds me of Marquez a lot. Where Marquez was like a sponge when he came to GP.
Yeah.
He really upset the apple cart.
Yeah.
And I still think the most talented rider we've seen on a motorcycle is Marc Marquez.
Yeah.
But now we've got, what's that, 10, 11 years of tempering in MotoGP. That it's his pure skill level that keeps him where he is rather than his sheer bravery, I suppose. I mean, he's still a bull of the gate, but I think if you scroll him back to 2019 with his skill level, to he's 19 years old with his skill level he's got now, he'd be untouchable.
Yeah. We put him on a Ducati.
Yeah, well, even on a Honda at 19 years old with his skill
Yeah.
he has now, I think he'd be a very formidable opponent.
Yeah. Right.
It's just that 10 years in the game has tempered um, his willingness to go to that next level, so to speak.
Yeah.
And he's on arguably, the best bike or second best bike on the grid. You'd think he'd be winning it by now, but he's tempering what he's doing
Yeah.
over the preseason and the first few races.
Yeah.
I think in Coda you'll be quite a good race. I think he
I
can
thought
win it
so
personally.
too. He's pretty unbeatable. Well, he was unbeatable there till he crashed. So,
Yeah, I think he'll be fine there. I think he'll win it personally.
yeah.
But yeah, I think Acosta's also be another podium there.
Yeah. Wow.
Just the layout of that course, it favors people who use the front end of a motorcycle.
Yeah. Now you've been watching World Superbike?
I've never been huge on World Superbike,
Yeah. Did you
but
see the pass, Top Rack's pass on
yeah,
Batista?
I did watch the last
Tell me
weekend.
you weren't impressed with that.
I'm
That
sorry,
was
second.
impressive.
What was that?
I was just going to say, don't tell me you're not impressed with that.
Oh no, it was. Yeah, it
That's
wasn't
the
really.
pass of the year.
Yeah, yeah. And I'm actually really impressed with how well Top Rack's adapted to it.
Yeah,
Uh, I know they're World Superbikes and they're different machines to what we have on the road. I know they're meant to be heavily based on what we have as road bikes as well. And the core DNA of the BMW the whole time has been a lack of turning speed. It doesn't hold a line for given speed in the middle of the corner compared to the rivals.
yeah,
They've got the power, they've got brake stability, they've never had the cornering ability in the middle of the corner. And BMW have known this. They've had, I think, 6 model iterations since 2019 across the double R, the M, the whatever other version they've brought out over the years.
yeah.
And the newest version now goes a long way to address it. But the true difference in it is Top Rack. He is making the difference. And he's combining that late braking ability that he's had to learn on the Yamaha, um, and making that bike around corners. It's making it carry the corner speed. Because even Van der Mark and the rest have been on it for a while, they still can't do that too. And Top Rack's new to it.
He's at another level, isn't he?
Yes.
They've
Again, it's
got,
that front tire feel.
I feel that's this, it was a smart move on BMW's part. They got the best rider on their bike. So
Yep.
if they've
Yep.
ever got a chance, it's this year.
Yeah. But I think it's a smart choice from BMW based on the characteristics of Top Rack.
Right.
Top Rack is such a strong breaker and such a strong accelerator. It plays strength to the BMW's strengths.
Yeah, right.
You're better off championing your strengths than trying to manage your weaknesses.
Yeah,
At the end of the day, a Yamaha doesn't accelerate like a BMW does or a Ducati does. So you have to brake like an absolute demon in order to make the lap time.
yeah, right.
And that's no different to Marquez on the Honda. It was always on the brakes. And that's why he had these bowling ball moments. That's where he made the lap times. That's where you had to go. And Top Rack's no different. He is such an amazing late breaker. His feel on that front tire is amazing. That it really allows the BMW to go in really deep, quite late, put on its ear, pivot the bike, and fire off the corner, which is what the BMW wants. And when you ride the road bike version, it's the same deal. They don't really they need a lot of lean angle to carry that radius at a certain speed compared to another bike like a Yamaha or a Ducati or whatever else. And so you tend to make every corner a V rather than a U.
Yeah.
And the Top Rack does that by default. So it really favors it.
You think he can win?
Yep, I do.
Yeah. If anyone can win on a Beamer, it's him.
Well, let's face it, only a couple of races in, he's there.
Yeah, it's amazing.
He's there in the mix all the time. Um, the biggest threat will be Bautista still. Once they get that bike worked out for
Mm.
him,
Yeah.
um, it'll become a 2 horse race again, I reckon. But yeah, I think Top Rack, he's got a bit of an advantage in terms of banking points. If he can just be there for the first half of the year, he'll have a really good shot at winning it this year.
Yeah.
Yeah, which then paves the way possibly for 2027 MotoGP with BMW, because that seems to be the running rumor
Yeah,
right
I
now.
heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, running rumor. So
Wow.
that'd be interesting.
I cannot wait. I'm
Yeah,
in the field. Yeah.
be good to get on the
Um,
main.
mate, I've taken enough of your time. It's Easter Monday, so I really, really appreciate the fact that you did this and come and shared your wisdom with us. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it. And all the best for Ride Dynamics and all that. And we'll be in touch soon.
Yeah, mate. Yeah, let's go for a ride one day.